Hello, my friends. Allow me to welcome you back to Nocturnity. We have some dream premonition stories for you tonight that, aside from amazing you, just may have you analyzing and journaling what your subconscious shows you at night from here on out. As always, this broadcast is brought to you by cardanapparel.com. Designer wear for the club, gym, work, or street. Cardan Apparel will have you looking good, and the link is in the description. But before you go shopping with Cardan, first sit back and relax and allow us to take you into the realm of eternal night. I've told this story before, and I am always happy to tell it again. When I was in my mid-20s, back in the good old 1980s, yes, that's right, last century, I worked as a traveling saleswoman. This meant staying in a lot of hotels for the cheapest prices my company would provide, so as you could imagine, I stayed in some seedy neighborhoods. One such stay was in a gang-ridden neighborhood in East Los Angeles. I'd stayed places like this before and wasn't afraid in the least. I just minded my own business, stayed inside the room at all times, and slept through the nights. Got up early and then I'd leave. This time was different though, because minding your own business doesn't do you much good when danger forces itself into your personal space. In other words, you can steer around a visible landmine when you know to look for one, but you can't always dodge a stray, unexpected bullet. But let's avoid talk of bullets and stick to the topic at hand. On the night in question, I did my usual routine of checking in at the motel, setting up my work for the next day, and then I read a bit of my book until I felt my eyes getting heavy, at which point I turned off the light and fell asleep. I had a dream that night I'd always remember afterwards. In it, I was sitting in a serene field on a blanket on a warm, sunny day. There were other people around enjoying the day on their blankets too, some having picnics while others were playing catch or tag with their children. The ambiance was pure joy and comfort. It was euphoria, pretty much. A man then approached me with a smile and sat down next to me on my blanket. He wasn't anyone I'd met in my lifetime, but he was familiar, and I had a trust for him like one you'd have for a close family member. "I have to tell you something," he said to me calmly. I asked, "What is it?" He remained calm and kept a happy look on his face as he answered, "Danger is on its way to you, but you're going to be okay if you can follow my instructions. Can you do that?" "Of course I can," I replied trustingly and without an ounce of fear. That is, he was talking about danger, but his demeanor was so calm and I trusted him so strongly that it didn't scare me at all in this dream setting. "Good," he said with an even bigger smile. "Now listen closely. There is a small door under the bathroom sink that was never quite latched after the plumbing was put in. I need you to wake up, grab your keys, and go there right away. Kick it as hard as you can, and when you're out, run to your car and drive to the police station 3 blocks north and 2 blocks east. Move fast and don't stop until you're at the police station." This was confusing to me, because I was dreaming, but of course I didn't know it at the time. So the idea of waking up didn't make any sense, and neither did what he said about a bathroom sink. I looked around at the field and turned back and began to say, "What are you talking about?" but didn't finish the sentence as the man was gone. The next thing I knew, my eyes were opening to see a dark motel room's cracked and water-damaged ceiling above me. Right away, I heard the door handle of the room start jiggling. I looked up to see it moving. Someone was trying to get into my room. Panic set in and I kind of froze. Then the memory of the dream filled my head. Wake up, grab your keys, bathroom sink, small door, police station. I suddenly found myself springing into action. I jumped up and grabbed my keys and ran into the bathroom. Under the sink, there was a little square outline on the wall behind the pipes, no bigger than a standard single cupboard. I sat down and kicked my heel dead center of the square, and that part of the wall popped out a little. Right after this, I heard the window in the other room shatter. My heart now beating, I gave it another hard kick and it went flying, exposing a hole in the wall. As the lock in my room's front door clicked and the door opened, I was shimmying my way through the opening and out into the alley behind the motel. I ran to my car barefoot as fast as I'd ever run, hopped inside, started it up, and gunned it out of there. Remembering the directions, I ended up at the police station in mere minutes. After reporting the break-in, a few officers ran to a police car and disappeared down the road towards the motel. They caught the guy, and it turned out they'd been looking for him for a long time. He was linked to many assaults and many break-ins in the area. I would have been his next victim. I shudder at the thought. I don't know who that was that I saw in my dream. Perhaps my guardian angel. Whoever he was, he saved my life, and I'll forever be grateful. Dreams have always fascinated me. I look forward to sleeping every night, not just for the opportunity to get some rest after a long day, but because I know I'm about to escape to another world, one that at the very least seems every bit as real as this one. I've personally been having vivid dreams for as long as I can remember. Many of them give me that overwhelming feeling of deep meaning in the mornings when I wake up from them. But one dream in particular has made a spot in my memory that will never be erased for obvious reasons that you'll understand soon. I had it when I was about 12 or 13 years old in the dead of winter, right around Christmas time. It was a very intense sort of dream, a borderline nightmare actually. I was in a place I'd never been, a shopping mall of sorts, when a robber in a ski mask armed with a rifle appeared and started shouting out demands. At his order, everyone got on the floor, except for me. For some reason, I kinda knew he couldn't hurt me, or even see me for that matter. I was scared because of the intensity, but certainly not for my safety. I knew that I was safe. I didn't know I was dreaming at the time, if that's what you're wondering, but you kinda go with the flow in dreams, and this was just kind of how it was. The strange thing was, there was a child on the floor beside her mother who could see me. The mother I couldn't really see as she was bundled up in her winter jacket wear and face down on the ground, but her daughter, who she was holding close to her side, almost covering her completely, was somewhat visible, at least her eyes were. I could see them peeking out from above her winter jacket and below her toque. They purveyed an urgency and were locked on mine. Her look seemed to be directing me to act. It's as if she was mentally conveying the message that I could stop the situation before anyone was seriously hurt. It was like she was sending all this information from her brain to mine without having to say a word. We just understood each other. I'd never seen her before, but oh my, was our connection undeniably strong. As the man continued to scream and point his rifle around at these innocent people, some customers, some employees, I found myself walking over to him, almost as if there was a force guiding me along, and everything now seemed to be happening in somewhat of slow motion. As expected, he didn't notice me. As I walked, I turned my head back to glance at the little girl on the ground, noting that she wasn't taking her eyes off of me. I instinctively put my foot out as the man was turning towards the counter with the cash register, tripping him. He fell down in slow motion. As I watched him go down, out of the corner of my eye, I caught the mother of the young girl suddenly spring into action. She jumped to her feet and ran past me as if I didn't exist, which, to her, I guess I didn't, and jumped right on the gunman. This prompted a chain reaction. Suddenly, everyone was jumping to their feet and attacking the man. He was getting kicked and punched from all directions. I watched as one of the men wrapped his hands around the rifle and pried it from the gunman's grip. He was completely overtaken and the people were now safe, and then I woke up. This was a dream that I thought about for years, but life goes on, and as more and more things enter your brain, you tend to forget about the thoughts of times past. This dream became just that, a forgotten memory. I grew up, went to high school and then college, fell in love, got married, had children, and fell into a career of design. One of my daughters, Mary, and me, had the privilege of going to see one of my latest clothing designs at a local department store recently, a rain jacket for the winter that I was commissioned to make for a well-known brand I'll intentionally not mention here. We were quite excited to go and see the design I'd worked on for so many months, now made into a real-life product. Of course, no one else knew that I designed it. To them, it would just be another raincoat on the rack, but that's okay. We always like to go see the products that I've had a hand in creating when they're released, and for us, especially me, it's exciting. After we'd taken a look, we were on our way out when we entered most people's worst nightmare. Before we could exit the automatic sliding doors, an armed man in a mask entered from the snow holding a gun. It was hard to even fathom at first. He was right in front of us. It was like we were standing in the middle of a scene from a movie. But this was no movie. This was real. He was real. The gun was real. We obeyed as he demanded we get on the ground, as did all the staff at the registers and shoppers surrounding us, and I did my best to act as a shield and cover Mary as best I could. Oddly enough, though, through all this terrifying pandemonium, a thick wave of déjà vu hit me so hard I nearly had to brush it away. I had seen this exact scenario before. I couldn't place it, though, but I couldn't deny it either. I looked down at Mary, whose eyes were locked on mine, and that turned the key. The dream I had as a teenager that I had since forgotten came back in vivid detail. I looked up at the masked gunman and watched him as he tripped backwards, just as he had when I tripped him in the dream when I was a teenager. Without thought or hesitation, I sprang to my feet as he fell backwards and pounced on him. The next thing I knew, everyone around me followed my lead and dogpiled on top of us. His gun was torn from his hands and he took quite a thrashing from the crowd of people after I was pulled off of him by a young man who worked at the store. It was a terrifying experience, but it ended with nobody getting seriously injured and a criminal getting locked up for his crimes. The policeman who took our statements called us heroes and asked me personally where I'd found the courage to have acted the way I did, and so quickly. I told them it was instinct and left it at that, but I know, and now Mary knows, as I told her everything afterwards, that what happened that day had been shown to me in a dream when I was her age, that I had seen her and myself in that dream and only knew to attack when I did because of that vision being shown to me. By who? I don't know. How? I don't know. But I am thankful it was, and advise all who dream to pay close attention to what they're being shown. It may save your life one day. When I was a very young boy in Poland, I had a series of dreams about an imaginary friend named Mikolaj. Well, my parents referred to him as my imaginary friend. To me, even though I only saw him in my dreams, he was very real, and I loved him like a brother. Of course, when I grew a little older and stopped seeing him in my dreams, I eventually accepted that Mikolaj was a figment of my active childhood imagination. But even so, my heart always harbored a warm place for his memory. Most of the dreams consisted of innocent play inside my house. We weren't a wealthy family, but I was an only child, which was rare in those days, and consequently I had a large playroom filled with toys all to myself. Me and Mikolaj would play with blocks or play tag or hide and seek in these wonderful dreams of mine and share smiles and laughter the whole time. 90% of these dreams were of this type. Unfortunately, there was also a reoccurring nightmare within the mix of all this fun. This dream was almost exactly the same every time. The house was dark and cold. There was an impending sense of danger always right around the corner, not so much for me, but for Mikolaj. He would be scared and distant, paranoid, shaken, always looking over his shoulder. He would tell me he has to go to his special place before whatever it was got there. His special place was in a closet in our basement right outside of my playroom. In that closet was a small hatch that led to a little storage area beneath our staircase. I can still see Mikolaj disappearing into that little crawl space, a scared look on his young face, and I can see him closing the hatch behind him in my mind, as if I'd had that very dream last night, even though this was over 60 years ago. I have always been able to recall this. I have thought about it many times over my life. This is where my story takes a turn out of the seemingly ordinary and goes full speed into the extraordinary. Years ago, when I was in my late 50s, I visited my cousin who still lives in Poland, not far from the town that I grew up in. Over breakfast, I was struck with utter astoundment as I read the paper. There, looking up at me from the pages of the news, was Mikolaj. Not a grown-up version of him, the exact same 7 or 8-year-old Mikolaj I had played with in my dreams. There was no mistaking it. And to verify this, his name was written right under the picture. The spoon fell right out of my hand as I sat there with my mouth gaping. My cousin and her family were obviously curious as well as concerned and asked me what was wrong. "This boy," I said, showing them the paper. "I know this boy." "Ah," my cousin sighed, "I suppose you've heard." As I stared at the picture, she explained what the article would have told me had I read it, which I did, by the way, as she explained the situation. She said, "That boy has been missing for quite some time now. There have been many search parties, but none have turned up any clues. His father was placed under arrest for suspicion of kidnapping him from his ex-wife after a nasty divorce, but they couldn't prove anything and they had to let him go. The boy's now supposed dead. Tragic. His name was..." "Mikolaj," I interrupted. "That's right," she responded. "Come to think of it, I believe the father of the boy lives in your old neighborhood in Gdynia." I could have fallen out of my chair, and I'm surprised I didn't. As I scanned the article, I saw the photo of the father standing right outside of the house that I grew up in. The nightmare of Mikolaj went through my memory as fast as a lightning bolt, and I jumped up from the table. "We have to go to the police," I declared. They were all taken aback by this. "The police are well aware of the situation," my cousin's husband said. "That's my house," I said, throwing the paper down on the table and pointing at the picture of the father, "and I know where Mikolaj is." They must have thought I was crazy, and I cannot blame them. They couldn't feel the almost supernatural force that was suddenly compelling me from the inside to take action, but they obliged their guest anyways and brought me to the police station. It was, after all, my childhood home. The police probably thought I was crazy too, but they listened to me as I explained that I grew up in the house Mikolaj's father lived in and knew that he was in there. They told me they'd searched the house and found nothing, but would take note of my information, and then basically dismissed me as a nut. Had I told them about me seeing Mikolaj in my dreams as a child, they probably would have had me locked up, but I didn't say a word about that. Just the same, I knew they weren't going to do anything about my visit in terms of Mikolaj at the moment anyways, if ever. That wasn't satisfactory to me, and it certainly did nothing to subdue my drive. And so as I was heading back to Canada the next day, I had to formulate a plan B. Later that afternoon, I borrowed my cousin's car and told them I was going for a drive to clear my head. By this point, they were probably sure I was a loon and threw me the keys as soon as I'd asked, if for no other reason than to have me out of the house. I drove right to my old neighborhood. I hadn't seen it in decades. The town had changed quite a bit. It had grown. But much still remained the same. My house was near exact. I sat in the car across the street from it for some time just watching, trying to formulate a plan, and while deep in this thought, a car arrived and pulled into the driveway. Out stepped the man from the newspaper. That sense of foreboding danger from my dreams as a child returned to me after all those years. I found myself stepping out of the car and sprinting towards the man as he trudged down the walkway from the driveway to his front door, catching him halfway between the two. He was a smaller man, but his surprised scowl made him appear threatening. I suddenly came to my senses to realize that I too am a small man and was now trespassing on a suspected kidnapper's property. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "I told you people, no goddamn interviews. Leave me be." He pushed past me and doubled his pace to the front door. As he swore under his breath and fumbled through his keys in his hand, I approached again. Seeing this, he threw the keys down in frustration and came at me with his fist cocked back, ready to strike, yelling, "No goddamn interviews! Get off my property!" I put my arms up to block and said, "I'm not with the press, sir. I'm from Canada." This confused him and somehow worked to diffuse his rage for a moment. "What? Canada?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I've lived in Canada for a good 30 years, Toronto, Ontario, but I grew up in this house. I'm visiting relatives and I came by to see it." "Oh," he replied, scowl still on his face. "Well, you've seen it, so there you go. Goodbye." He turned back, picked up his keys, and began to fumble through them again while facing the front door. "Well, if it isn't too inconvenient for you, sir, I would love to take a look inside, see my childhood bedroom and all that." He turned back to me. "I've got an idea," he stated. "How about I go inside alone first and grab my bow and arrow, and when I come back outside, if I see you anywhere on this street, I use you as a moving target. How does that sound?" He turned back, unlocked the door, and walked inside, slamming it and locking several locks behind him. I took the hint and ran back to my cousin's car and took off down the road, but I didn't go far. I parked a block down and kept my eyes on the house while I plotted my next move. Lo and behold, the man ended up coming back outside not long after, with no bow and arrow, thankfully. I got low in my car and watched him look around with that scowl on his face before hopping into his own. He whizzed it back in reverse and then took off down the street in the opposite direction. It was go time. Without trepidation, I started up the engine and flew down to my old house, parking it on the street outside of it. I hopped out full of adrenaline and tried the front door. It was locked. I looked at all the windows in the front and they were shut. I had to think fast. I'd never broken into a house before and didn't know the first thing about how to, so I did what every amateur would do. I picked up a stone, ran around back to where I thought the neighbors couldn't see, ran up the stairs onto the sun deck and smashed a window. This proved to be not as effective as I thought it would be. The glass broke, but not enough for me to crawl through without being seriously hurt, so I had to run back down the stairs to search for a stick adequate enough to clear away all the jagged pieces still left in the window frame. After finding one, I ran back up and managed to clear it all away, and then I made my way into what was my parents' room when I was a kid, now this man's room. The mixture of fear and adrenaline at such high levels at that moment was like the strongest drug in existence, but my focus was otherworldly. I was on a mission, one that I felt I'd been primed for my entire life. These feelings were combined with the strange feeling of being back in that house after what seemed like an entire lifetime, especially with all this different furniture in there. This man was a pig. He was filthy, messy. It smelled terribly. But there was no time to sit and judge or even reminisce. I heard sirens in the distance, and they only reminded me that this was an emergency situation that I was dealing with. As I tore down the staircase towards the basement, I passed the front door, and I'll be damned if there wasn't a very expensive and deadly-looking bow and arrow sitting right there, the kind with a trigger. Thank God I'd left when I was told to earlier. Now I just hoped I could be out of there before this madman returned home. Now at the bottom of the stairs, I opened the closet door outside my old playroom, which now looked like a room where animals were kept, though there were no animals to be seen. Worse than that, the hatch in the closet that led to the space under the stairs was covered over by a wall of wainscoting. Damn it, I thought to myself as I dropped to my knees in defeat. I've lost my bloody mind. There's no one in here, and now I've broken into this psychopath's house. I gotta get out of here. Placing my hands on the wood panels in front of me to help lift myself back up to my feet, I suddenly realized something incredible. This isn't wainscoting, I said to myself out loud. I pulled the string above me to turn the light on in the closet. It wasn't wainscoting at all. This was some type of cheap wallpaper with a wood panel design on it. I quickly ran my hand up the wall as the sirens outside grew louder and louder. Grabbing a piece of hanging wallpaper in the top corner of the closet, I pulled down to reveal the hatch. However, now it was covered in locks. The sirens were now surely right outside the house. I soon heard pounding on the front door and voices yelling to let them in. With no keys, I did what I had to do. I stepped back and started kicking the hatch as hard as I could, while at the same time I heard boots upstairs. They were inside now, probably through the same window I'd entered in from. As they began to run down the stairs, my kicks finally prevailed and the hatch flew open. "Freeze!" I heard from behind me. I obeyed, knowing that there were guns pointing at me. They grabbed me and threw on handcuffs and spun me around. "You!" the officer shouted, recognizing me from earlier that day. "You really are crazy. I hope it was worth it because now you're going to jail." "My God!" another officer yelled before I could respond. "Look!" We all turned towards his line of vision. There inside the crawl space was the glowing of a child's terrified eyes, barely lit from the light in the closet, but unmistakable. The officer holding me looked me in the eyes for a second in disbelief, then threw me aside to pull a very skinny, sick and scared-looking young boy out from the crawl space. "Mikolaj," I couldn't help but to utter. It was him, my old friend, my old playmate, right where he told me he would be so many decades before. A tear dripped down my eye as they took him away. I was taken to the police station after that and questioned for quite some time. They were very suspicious of me at first, but eventually realized I couldn't have been involved in Mikolaj's kidnapping and decided that what I had said earlier that day must have been the truth. My cousin corroborated that I grew up in that house and knew of that crawl space under the stairs. I ended up staying in Poland for a few weeks longer than planned, and I was allowed to officially meet Mikolaj, who was happy and healthy by then. It was amazing. This was the friend from my dreams as a child. He wasn't imaginary after all, though I never told him about any of that. I don't know where he is now, but I heard through family that his father was caught many years later in Belgium on an unrelated charge. He killed himself in prison not long after. I'd like to think Mikolaj has grown up into a fine and happy young man. As for me, well, I'm old and gray now and don't have too many years left in me. But I still dream, and that's really all one can ask for. That about does it for now, my friends. Thanks for visiting Nocturnity. We hope you've thoroughly enjoyed tonight's tales. Once again, this broadcast has been brought to you by cardanapparel.com. If you're going to attract attention, let Cardan Apparel make it of the positive variety. The link, as always, is in the description. Be sure to like this video to help our channel in the algorithm and share it wherever you can. If you haven't yet subscribed, just hit the button to do so. We encourage you to return to Nocturnity soon, and until then, happy dreams, my friends.